Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. I have someone very, very special with me, Mr. Terry Milewsky, who has written a note quite a while ago, as a matter of fact, saying Khalistan, a project of Pakistan. Of course, we in India always knew this, the K2 theory of Ziaul Haq, and of course, his companions of that time. We know the K2 game, but it's very interesting that things are spanning out today almost 50, 55 years after the game was started. So let me welcome him and take his opinion on what's happening today. Namaskar, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the platform.
Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
I want to know a couple of things, sir, with regards to just right at the open. We see this resurgence of this Khalistan movement, which is there in Canada, and I see it post 2016. Why suddenly a resurgence post 2016?
Uh, the resurgence, I think, is apparent rather than real. I think that the resurgence arises from uh, greater publicity, and that's a deliberate tactic by, for example, Sikhs for Justice, the organization headed by Gopatwant Singh Panoon, which has been flogging the idea of a referendum all over the world. They're talented publicists. They have managed to uh, grab attention, not just with the concept of having a referendum, but also with their appeals for anger and rage against India, their threats against India and its officials, offering rewards for the home addresses of Indian diplomats posted around the world, calling them killers, parading through the streets of a major Canadian city with a flatbed truck adorned with a, a tableau, a life-size tableau celebrating the assassins of Indira Gandhi, with Mrs. Gandhi's sari splashed with red paint so that everybody gets the point that shedding blood is good, and these assassins were heroes. These are our shaheeds. So, for all of those reasons, the publicity campaign and the threats, and of course, in the last couple of years, the murders um, of a couple of prominent people, Rapudaman Singh Malik in 2022, an Air India bombing suspect, of course, and more recently, the murder last year of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was number two to Panoon and Sikhs for Justice. So that's why we're hearing more about it. But I'm making the distinction, as you can tell, between that impression and the reality, which is that support for an independent Sikh state is absolutely rock bottom, and it seems to be an even smaller minority today than it ever was. It's a show, and it's a great show, but it's not actually making anything happen on the ground.
One thing which actually astonishes me is the factor that they have come out to a point where their rhetoric is hard. Killing, assassinations, you're talking about home addresses, threatening people right at the beginning. As you say, it's a show. Is Are these tactics kind of meant to grab attention around the world, to showcase something which is bigger, larger than what it actually is?
Yes, I mean, the name of the game for them is to pretend, and it is a pretense, that they speak for the world Sikhs.
Hmm.
They are the authentic voice of the Sikhs. And if you object to the threats or the violence or any kind of anything you don't like about it, whatever you say, that is not in favor of an independent Khalistan, they say that's anti Sikh. You're a racist. You're anti Sikh, as though, which of course is a slur by them on the wider Sikh community, as though they all identify with the violence. If you say you're against violence, that's anti-Sikh. Are Sikhs then all violent? What? Why do they deserve this smear that is laid upon them by Khalistanis who are? It has no logic. It makes no sense. As I say, I think they've been very successful. I think that their internet presence and their presence with the vigor, wonderful posters. They do really good posters, which they post on the internet and blow up big and stick on the side of the Gurdwara, stick on the side of the Baisakhi parade float, and they catch attention. Kill India, one of them says, or wanted for assassination. What you mean? You want us to assassinate? And then in small print, for the assassination of Nijjar, they're blaming the diplomat for the assassination of Aadi Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia. They've been very successful at getting attention. I'm simply saying that I don't think that has translated, not yet anyway, into a mass movement to create a breakaway state in Punjab or anywhere else.
Yeah, well, there's probably more demand in that part of the world than there is in back home in India, of for this something like this. But I want to ask you, it is now taken a shape of diplomacy, where larger players in the world, for example, Canadian government and the US government has kind of jumped into it and pointed a finger at India and said that you are involved in assassination attempts uh, within the US against Panu. And of course, Niger, as the Prime Minister of Canada very clearly states, that they have credible evidence. What that is, we've not come to know. But what do you kind of assess from this? This, have they been able to get the kind of attention that they are looking for to make it an internationalized event, or is there something behind it? What is your opinion?
Well, I think that the Canadians, to some extent, did the right thing by raising the question, but the wrong thing by not providing us with evidence to believe the allegations that were made in the Canadian case by Prime Minister Trudeau on September the 18th of last year, when, as you know, he said that they were after, as you say, credible allegations that the government of India was, in some capacity, official, semi official, was somehow connected to the people who plotted the murder of Nijjar in Surrey in June of last year. In the American case, however, it's a different story. And for the Indian side of this question, it's a much more difficult story because they did bring evidence, a lot of evidence. They backed up a truck and emptied a whole truckload of evidence and were able to show that they had penetrated the plot from the start. They have recordings, wiretaps, they have text messages, they have photographs of the money changing hands. They've got the inside dope on the plot to kill Nijjar in New York, in Panoon in New York, and Nijjar in Canada. And at the moment, there's a bit of a rearguard action that you may have noticed by the government of India to say, no, 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 these are two separate cases. Trudeau, bad. Trudeau didn't have evidence. He's never produced any evidence. United States, different story. We're taking it very seriously. We're appointing a high-level committee. We're going to investigate. Problem. It's the same plot. Both are describing the same plot to kill the same people. A plot by the same people. In fact, the same individual that they've dubbed CC1 at the heart of the Indian government. So the Indian government finds itself in a very difficult position. It's one thing to dismiss Prime Minister Trudeau's allegations as worthless, absurd, unsubstantiated, because he hasn't really produced anything that will convince anyone. But quite another, considering the vastly greater geopolitical clout borne by the United States, and particularly when it comes with receipts, as we say, and photographs of the money changing hand. It's much more difficult to dismiss that. And at the moment, the Indian government is trying a kind of trick, it seems to me, which isn't going to work at all. That no, these are two different things, and Canada is still guilty of making baseless allegations, even though the allegations are not baseless at all. And that is something which the Indian government has yet to confront fully. I mean, I saw yesterday Foreign Minister Jaishankar is a very careful man with his speech, a very distinguished politician, very experienced fellow, for whom I personally have a great deal of regard. And he's been sort of skating away from this, saying, for example, you probably heard this line, well, this kind of, extrajudicial executions, he says, it's not our policy. And you just think to yourself, oh, so nothing happens in India unless it's government policy? It's not like that in Canada or anywhere else for that matter. And then most recently, I believe Mr. Jaishankar was quoted as saying anyway that, well, Canada is still guilty of letting in criminals and all of that, all of which is true, and all of which is also irrelevant to the allegations made that the government was in some way party to a plot to murder.
One of the interesting things which is in Canada, in India today, as a narrative on Canada, is that if Canada wants to kind of clean this up, work with the Indian government and make sure that these kind of elements are not given the space. The issue is that here is a person called Panu who has been directly implicated within India as being a terrorist. He has supplied weapons, money, drugs, support to fringe elements, criminals within the country who have created chaos during the farmers' protest, right? And that's something which a lot of people are upset about. And of course, the difference in handling the protest, we kind of let it happen, and the crackdown which happened in this thing. So the hypocrisy of the whole game is what does not go down the throat of any Indian. That listen, when you have a protest in Canada, you crack it down. When we have a protest in Canada, we get a statement from the highest authority in Canada, and we know how they are linked. Then we see the Prime Minister sitting in a Khalistani rally right now, very recently, where these slogans are, come about. Uh, how do you see this whole political mess that this thing has created? It's a no-go zone for that matter. I mean, it's very
Well,
difficult to come back from this.
well, you make it sound pretty bad. I'm here to assure you that it's actually worse than you're saying. It wasn't just the prime minister, by the way, who was at that Khalsa Day rally just
Yes,
what was it,
because
10 days ago? The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, was also there, and so was the leader of the third party, the NDP, Mr. Jagmeet Singh,
Mhm.
who's got a long record, as you well know, on the Khalistan issue. Um, so I know that Indians at the moment are having fun beating up on Trudeau. Believe me, Canadians are too. The pollsters say his time is up. You won't have him to kick around that much longer. And that come the next election, he would likely be defeated by Mr. Poilievre. So you should perhaps be paying attention to the fact that Poilievre was at that rally as well. And they were all smiling and waving, as they always do at the Vaisakhi parades every year, as the parade floats go by with pictures of gun toting martyrs and assassins, to include, for example, the worst mass murderer in Canadian history, the Air India bomber himself, Talvinder Singh Parmar. You've seen the poster, life size poster on the outside of the, permanently fixed to the outside wall of a major Gurdwara in a major Canadian city.
Mhm.
Uh, if that isn't incitement of terrorism, it's the glorification of terrorism. Of course it is. And other countries, perhaps more mature countries in some respects. I'm thinking of Britain in 2015 updated its anti-terrorism act to include the glorification of terrorism. And we have laws about, inciting hate. Well, you could call it that, but we don't have a law specifically for that kind of thing, the glorification of terrorism. So uh, we've normalized it, and that's why I say it's worse than you say. It's not just that it happens once in a while. It happens all the time, and it's been going on for 20 years. And sadly, they haven't been paying any attention to me. Um, so what's happening now is that the Khalistanis are putting their finger in the wind, and they realize that if they take a little, they might get a lot next time. What I mean is that 20 years ago, when I started whining about all of this, they'd put an 8 by 10 picture on the side of the parade float of Palma. Look around, nobody objected. Next year, it's a big picture. And then the next year, they fix it on the outside of the Gurdwara. And then they've got all the other martyrs all over the parade floats, and the assassins of General Fajia, and the assassins of Indira Gandhi, and the assassins of the First Minister of Punjab, Beant Singh, in 95, and on and on and on. They're all great shaheeds. And so they are directly appealing, they're holding these people up as models for CQ. And yes, I believe that publicity campaign is successful in attracting that minority, keeping the minority on board, keeping the faithful happy. What I'm adding, though, is that it's not going beyond that yet. It's not going to be a mass movement anytime soon. They just don't have the appeal.
That's not what we are worried about. What we are worried about is what happens at the back end. For example, the World Sikh Organization.
Yeah.
Uh, this is a very shady organization that is of course funded by very shady people, and that's something that we've come to know over time, that George Soros, Open Society Foundation, whole lot of these kind of people have been funding these guys, and uh, there is a lot of chaos which is created within our country. So the argument is that if the Canadian government is not going to help us do this, then we'd rather as well fix it ourselves. Send a message that, listen, you're not safe anywhere.
Yes,
And
but
something that you
go on.
could equate with anti-terrorism operations done by multiple other countries in the West.
Yes, and I think it's a good argument that the Indian side makes anytime this comes up. So you come to lecture us about murdering a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. You guys, the big rich Western democracies, you've been doing this forever. And, what about Soleimani? What about Osama bin Laden? What about? What about? What about? And of course, there are distinctions to be made. People in the West argue, well, it's different if you go after bin Laden in a place where there is no prospect of justice. You're not going to get, it's an ungoverned space in that respect in Pakistan,
Mm.
where there won't be justice if they present their bill of charges against Osama, and the Pakistanis are not going to give him up. So there's no choice. Well, anyway, that's the argument, like it or not, that the Indians encounter. However, there is no question that there's a great deal of hypocrisy in this field, and that Canada, in particular, not alone. I would include Britain and to some degree the United States in this as well. But Canada, in particular, has been particularly slack in looking the other way. I mean, I won't go on. Let me just I'll give you
Yeah.
one.
You-
One example, 1982, Indira Gandhi and Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister, Justin's father. And Mrs. Gandhi brought up the question of the separatists running all over Canada, doing anything they like, firing guns in the Indian consulate in Toronto at one point, and nobody was charged. Come on, this is crazy. And Pierre Trudeau nodded to all of this, and then came and Mrs. Gandhi followed up and presented a request for the extradition of the same Tovinder Singh Parmar, the Air India bomber. And Trudeau said no. Why
Mhm.
not? He was wanted for the murder of 2 policemen in Punjab. This is, it's not stealing a car. We're talking about a serious offense. And, well, we're not convinced, and plus, the Sikhs will be angry. The Canadian Sikhs will be angry if I give him up. He didn't say so, but they came up with some crazy excuse. Maybe you've heard it. I couldn't believe it when I found it in the archives. The official excuse for not sending him back to India was that India does not acknowledge the Queen as head of state. Why that would make any difference at all to whether the evidence is good or bad is a mystery to me. But it's, some creative bureaucrat said, okay, we've got to turn this down, come up with a reason by lunchtime. Okay. That's all he could think of. I mean, so there is hypocrisy and absurdity aplenty in this field. And Indians have a perfectly good point when they complain about it. Now, if I can just add one other thing, there is another side to this.
Mhm.
India has traditionally asked Canada to return people to India for whom there is not such good evidence, and where they seem to expect Canada, the United States, Australia, all kinds of Western countries. They say, "Well, yeah, but he's a terrorist." Okay, well, how can you got proof? No, but he's a terrorist. Okay, but calling him a terrorist isn't evidence. We need, we can't go to court with just, well, they say he's a terrorist. We got to have, is there a conviction? Is there evidence? Where is
Mm.
this evidence? And India has fallen short traditionally on that front and has not corrected that problem. They just say, well, the Western hypocrites are not helping us and they're
Mm.
bad people for, no, no, not really. There is another side to that story, and India, I think, needs to address that too. But I don't think it
Absolutely.
affects that's not really the crux of the issue
Mm.
in
Mm.
the current crisis, as between Canada and the United States, alleging both that uh, India is engaged in extrajudicial executions of its
Fair enough.
enemies.
When you look at the three people that have been arrested right now, they've come into Canada in 2021 on a student
Yeah,
visa. They've not joined college. They've not joined
they
work.
never
They've
went
not
to school.
done
That's
anything.
right.
They have not done anything. Now, here are three individuals that have some sort of a dubious record within India. They've ran away from here, right? And which is something that common that we see. A lot of times, a lot of these guys, and let me just tell you, a lot of these protests which actually happen in India are to create police records. When the police files a case within India, they have something called a victim card, and they go to the Canadian authorities and say, see, they're persecuting me, please give me asylum. And a lot of these guys are doing this. The underground underbelly of this
Yeah,
entire dirty underbelly, which is there. There are people in Australia, there are people in Canada, there are people in UK, and of course, Pannu's job is that he's sort of a lawyer to bring in people. Now, when you have a situation like this, that there are three people which are pretty much illegal in the country, uh, and I mean, this is the kind of issues that we are dealing with today. All the
yeah.
criminals that we see in India are literally taking a flight out to Canada.
And
So
getting
there is
in. That's the point. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
you look no further than the case of Nijjar. I mean,
Hmm.
apparently we're all supposed to be weeping
Plumber.
bitterly, tears for Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Well, how did he get in the country? Well, you probably heard the story. He
Fake passport.
arrives. He's got a false passport. What was it, Mr. Sharma, something like that?
Ravi
Uh,
Sharma.
yeah. He arrives with a false passport, and the immigration officer says, "Yeah, right, out," and threw him out. Wouldn't believe a word he said. All his stories about, oh, he'd been arrested, he'd been tortured, and yeah, 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 they all say that. He shooed him away. Denied. Came back the next week. Now he's got a Canadian wife suddenly. And so the immigration officer takes a second look and says,
Right.
come on, that's a marriage of convenience. I don't buy it. Out. And they kicked him out again. He comes back a third time. Now, problem with my story, I don't know the rest of the story. I can't tell you how he got in the country. I
Yep.
can't tell you what the immigration officer said because somehow, with the next wife, it worked. Despite that he was proven to have lied the first two times. The third time, no problem. Be my guest. Bienvenue au Canada.
See, that's the thing. How does a country trust? How does a mutual trust build up in two countries? And a lot of people, including myself, let me just say this with all honesty, I would support if the Indian government wanted to go and hit someone abroad who is creating chaos within the country.
I think
We
there
are
are
at a,
millions
at
like you. Yes.
we are at a conjecture in our We went through two horrible protests because of these, might I say, monkeys. Uh, we lost lives. They were terrible, and they were all incited by people sitting in America, in Canada, in UK. You saw what happened to our embassies. So when something like that happens, as an Indian citizen, I say go hit hard. I don't care if Canada wants to break its diplomatic relations with me. I don't care if we call a pariah for 6 months. So was Mohammed bin Salman. After that, everybody is now lovey-dovey with him. Why shouldn't I do something like that to protect my nation when nobody else is wanting to help me?
Yes, I mean, I think that there are probably hundreds of millions of Indians who agree with you. They don't much mind if the government resorts to illegal measures,
Yep.
extraordinary measures, shall we call them, to eliminate terrorists without
Hmm.
the bother of a trial. And by the
Hmm.
way, there might be more than a few Canadians who would agree with that too. However,
I know. I know a
um,
lot.
yeah, yeah, I got a few friends who feel that way too. Um, Although I doubt that they're in the majority for the simple reason that they do grow up learning that well, it sounds great, doesn't it? Just go
Yeah,
kill
it
them,
does. It does.
go kill them without a trial until they get it wrong, or until it happens to you or to your friend, and he was in my place that night. He had nothing to do. Never mind. Too late. He's dead. It's a double-edged sword, and I'm not going to be caught with a camera in front of my
Yeah,
face saying,
fair enough.
"Sure, yeah, just shoot them all. Never mind the trial." No, no. In a civilized world, you
I
need
understand that.
evidence. You
I
need
understand that.
evidence.
Yeah. When
But
I
I do acknowledge that you probably have more people agreeing with you than I do.
Yeah, yeah. But let me ask you this. The Sikhs have a population in Canada of 2.14% in total. Why so much pandering to a group which is so small? What is the game? What are these politicians getting out of it? There are
Well, that's a very
Muslims,
good
which are
question.
2.14%, where the
Yeah.
Mr. Trudeau is trying to appease them right now. There are Hindus, which are 8%, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So that's three,
Well,
four times the population.
certainly more than the Sikhs. Yeah, there are more Hindus than Sikhs,
Right?
though you'd never know it if you look at the newspapers because they're full of
Fantastic.
full of the Sikhs. I think it's a very important question because we can't seem to get over this hump in addressing this whole problem. We can't seem to get past the obstacle, which is politicians' fear, cowardice, uh, because they think wrongly, in my view, that this is how they can get elected. Because look, they're all Khalistanis, and they're all going to vote for me if I do come to their Vaisakhi parade and smile and wave at the Parma posters going by on the parade floats. They're wrong about that, in my view, because
Not
there
all
are
Sikhs are Khalistanis.
far more that want nothing to do with the Khalistanis, both Sikh and Hindu, needless to say, among
Hmm.
the Indian diaspora. And I think they might get a big surprise. Imagine, just humor me for a moment. Imagine if a Canadian Prime Minister, whether it's Mr. Trudeau or whether he's replaced by Mr. Poilievre or whoever, if for a Canadian Prime Minister to step up to an event like this recent one at Khalsa Day in Toronto, where they had the signs, let's arrest Modi, arrest Jaishankar for killer as being killers. Well, imagine if the Prime Minister stepped up and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to be party to this. I'm out of here, and I want you to know why. Because I
He'll
want
win.
nothing to do with the incitement of hate. I want nothing to do with martyr posters of mass murderers who slaughtered hundreds of civilians. That is a disgrace to you and to your religion. And I personally am not going to be coming here to pander to you and flatter you and try to get your votes because tell you what, I'm going to get more votes by telling you no, and the majority will vote for me. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to fall for it anymore. Goodbye." And then why wouldn't the leader of the opposition get up and say the same thing? He's right. We shouldn't have anything to do with this. This is an abomination, worshipping and glorifying the Air India bomber and all of these other martyrs and killers. It's a disgrace, and we're not going to have anything to do with it. If that were to happen, I believe it would show. One benefit would be that it would show that I was right. That there are more people who would vote the other way than the ones you
Yeah.
think you're getting by pandering to the Khalistanis.
Hmm. And they're no straight people. We know the largest drug haul that was done between US and Canada right now was again a Khalistani or a Khalistani sympathizer, if I may. I'm going to squeeze in one last question to you. Is that, there would have been multiple ways to handling these actions with the Indian government, right? Rather than putting it out in the open. Probably it was discussed with, as a lot of people say, during the G20, and that's the first time it was brought up with India. India being a very strategic partner, you wouldn't want to kind of mess around with it. There's no point. And your entire Indo-Pacific policy is based on India, not because of India is a great this thing or anything like that. Geography decides the policy, and geography kind of favors India in in that fashion. Uh, why would you create a diplomatic incident? Why would you kind of come out and put out statements that will create a huge incident as far as India is concerned? It's a growing power, it's a proud nation. People will not accept it, and people will bring about the arguments that I brought about today. Why are you pandering with terrorists? If you don't pander with terrorists, we
Okay,
won't kill them. It's something like that. Why would you put it out in the public?
I'm with you, but there's a problem with your question.
Hmm.
The problem is your assumption of why would you create a diplomatic incident? Who created it? Uh, there's another way of looking at it with respect. If uh, Canadians sent gangsters to India to
Hmm.
assassinate an Indian in India for reasons of our own, you might not like it. In fact, I can
Uh,
guarantee you wouldn't like it, and you would
uh,
accuse me of starting the diplomatic incident.
mhm,
So that's one thing. You got to remember that. I'm not saying that I haven't asked the same question myself. I'm just pointing out that there is a problem with it. It's the
mhm.
assumption that it's us, the Canadians, who made an incident out of it. You kill a guy in broad daylight. I'm not saying that that's conclusively proven. I'm saying, but if that is the case, then you're starting a diplomatic incident. That is not um, that's not normal behavior. Second of all, um, the Canadians didn't launch this by creating a public incident. They did what they should have done if they thought that what they were hearing was true. What they should have done is say, well, we can't assume that the Indian government was party to this. The police are saying, and CSIS is saying we got wiretaps, and the Americans are saying, well, we got more than wiretaps. We've got them dead to rights. And you can't release this, but we'll share the intelligence with you. And they all say it looks like there was some kind of New Delhi involvement, shall we say, and we're getting traffic that is very suspicious about that. Well,
Mhm.
if you were the Prime Minister of Canada, you might say, well, I'm not going to go and accuse Modi at the G20 of being a murderer. I'm going to ask him to help us with the investigation on the assumption that he's on the anti murder side of this question. And that is what the Canadians say they did. That they tried for weeks before the G20. They tried for weeks, they say, to get the Indians to say, yeah, well, we don't want any part of this. We'll help you in the investigation. We'll find this guy. We'll question him. We'll make evidence available to you as two Democratic allies ought to do. But they didn't say that. They wouldn't cooperate. So that is why the Canadians said, that suggests some sort of official complicity. Or at the very least, they want to protect the guys who are doing it, whether they were complicit or not. Having found out about it, they say, well, we're not, these are basically good guys fighting for our team, and we don't want them exposed to what, a Canadian court? I don't think so. Anyway, all of that is to say that there is a reason, and a good one, why Trudeau took the approach that he did. I personally think that the American approach was much more successful, whether you like it or not, and that is to talk softly and carry a big stick. They didn't get up in Congress and make a big speech, as Trudeau did. They didn't make any speech at all.
Hmm.
They only accused not the government, but a government employee, is the language of the indictment. So they produced the indictment through the normal court process, and they call this guy a government employee. So the effect is to give India, if it's true, it's to give India a bit of wiggle room, a little escape hatch. There's a window ajar there where they could say, "We're shocked to hear about this. We didn't know anything about it, and just give us the names, and we'll go and arrest this guy." I gave him an out. Now, what was the next leak? The next leak, of course, Washington's very good at leaks, right? It's an industry. The next leak was Indian Inquiry Committee reports that
Rogue
rogue
official.
operatives working without approval were responsible. No names are attached. Nobody's quoted. It's just a leak. So the Americans are twisting the knife a little. Say, okay, what the Americans want is first a guarantee that you'll never do this again. We are not going to allow your murderers to come to the United States and kill who you want to kill. That's not okay. And number two, we want heads to roll. We want that message to be public. We want to see justice done. No sweeping this under the rug. You have to be accountable for this, and you have to hold those responsible accountable. So the Indians went, "Oh dear, that's bad. Let's talk about it for weeks on end, but let's not do anything." That didn't work. What happened? The Americans twisted the knife again.
Put
Another
out
leak.
another leak.
Only this time it's the Washington Post, right? And the
Yeah.
Washington Post, the first time I think it was Bloomberg. And the Washington Post has a nice front page story naming the guilty, naming his boss, naming the national security advisor, and laying out all the other. So this is what can happen, the Americans are saying, in effect. If you don't play ball and you don't want to have heads rolling and justice seen to be done, you risk exposure. We were going to
If I
play nice, but not
if I may,
anymore. Go ahead.
do you know that these kind of exposures actually emboldens the narrative within India? It's actually counterproductive. One of the biggest things that the Americans want to do is put pressure on India. It doesn't. It actually emboldens the narrative.
Are you sure about that? Have you
Yeah,
noticed the difference between the reaction to the Canadian allegations, which was they're absurd, they're unsubstantiated, absolute baloney, dismissed it completely,
the
and it changed
yeah.
overnight when the
Mhm.
American indictment landed, and then suddenly it's we're taking it very seriously.
Absolutely. But when you look at the Washington Post article, the official statement that came out, it is rubbish. Now, see, that's the whole thing. It emboldens a certain narrative within India to say, okay, fair enough, you do what you want to. And that's the point. If you want to play ball, then you play ball. You want us to not do criminal activities in your country, then stop doing criminal activities in our country. And that's the question that a lot of Indians are asking. That, yeah, you want us to behave, we'd request you to do the same. Stop publicizing a Panu who we know is an asset of three letter agencies or whatever it is.
Hold it. How is that comparable? Publicizing Panu, putting him in the papers, which is a private sector decision to report the
No, not
news.
really publicizing.
How is
I
that a
think I chose the
parallel
wrong
with
word.
sending murderers?
I
It's not the
chose the
same as
wrong
sending
word.
murderers to your
Yeah,
country,
yeah.
is it?
I think I chose the wrong word. I would say stop kind of giving him that space, politically.
Well,
And
okay.
Panu
So,
gets more space in Canada than
all
America.
right.
That
Well, now we're getting
Hmm.
right down to it. So, can you
Yeah,
tell
yeah,
me
yeah.
how you would redesign U.S. and Canadian and British law to
I don't
forbid
know.
speech?
I don't know.
that,
I mean,
that doesn't
but
include any
calling for
terrorism.
murder, calling for
So there we
assassinations.
agree. There we agree.
Yeah,
So there's room for a deal, isn't there? If what it,
yeah.
because the U.S. isn't getting what
I
it
think you made
wants
a
yet,
point. Mhm.
and the Indians have their own demands, don't they? That
So
if
sit
you
down,
yeah, you better take care of these people if unless you want us to, because we will if you won't, right? That's the Indian message. So
yeah.
fair enough. So why doesn't the U.S. and Canada then say, all right, we are going to take this seriously, and if they're going to parade through the streets carrying pictures of Pama, we're going to charge them with an offense with inciting violence, inciting hate,
But you
which
don't
is
do
what
this
it
again
is.
in our country. Fair enough. Point taken.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a. I think you and I have reached an agreement that our government should. You know.
We solved the problem. They're not
Yay!
paying us enough.
I must say, sir, this was an honor. I promised you a half an hour, and I know I've extended it, but trust you me, this was a very, very good discussion. And by the end of it, when the viewer will see this, they will realize it's so easy to come down and actually sort this nonsense out because
Yeah,
it's pointless. These are countries that have had traditional relationships with each other. They want to work with each other. They don't want to. I mean, you look at who's the other country that they want to work with is China. I mean, it's even worse, right? So
yep.
these are countries that are linked with each other publicly, personally, people to people relations. There's so much happening, and then when these kind of things happen, leaves a bad taste in the mouth. I think both places.
Yeah. Well, they should hire us as the negotiators for Canada and India. We'd settle it by lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely, and have a
And then
beer
we'd
after
go out
that.
for a damn good lunch. Yeah.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much,
you.
sir.
I enjoyed this very much.
Absolutely lovely. Thank you so much for talking and taking out the time. And I'll stay in touch with you. I'll send you the link as soon as I release this out.
Yeah,
Thank you
send
so
me the
much.
link. Thank you. Bye.
Namaskar.